So, these are some of the comics I've done over the years, far too many. That was my first graphic novel, Hicksville, from 1998. Incomplete Works is a collection of my short comics, which came out beginning of last year. And then late last year, my new graphic novel, Sam Zabel and the Magic Pen, came out. And I sort of want to talk about that today, but what I really want to talk about is the absence of ink, the blank page, the silence that greets us when we look at the blank page as we sit down to write or draw, and the fear that keeps us from putting ink onto that page. The Magic Pen starts with Sam, the cartoonist, facing a blank, empty piece of paper with pencil poised, actually brush poised, unable to start. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with that feeling of staring at the blank paper, terrified of screwing up. We all feel that fear of doing it wrong, of drawing the wrong line or writing the wrong words. And that fear takes many forms. There are two particular kinds of fear that I want to focus on this morning. And the first one is familiar to everyone, which I've just talked about, the fear of not being good enough. And I think probably everyone has felt that. And I've met some very, very famous cartoonists around the world over the years, and when I talk about this stuff with them, they all continue to feel that. It doesn't matter how respected or successful they are, or how many awards they've won, or how much money they earn. Most of us don't have very much money. But I did meet Matt Groening, who created The Simpsons, and he's got quite a lot of money. But they all still feel that. You know, every time you sit down to do a drawing, you feel inadequate. And because of that fear, we end up falling silent. And one of the hardest things in the world is to break the silence. The longer it lasts, the thicker it becomes, the higher that icy wall becomes, and the less able we feel to put ink onto that paper. And so I wanted to kind of explore that, and I wanted to find a way out of it through my character, Sam. He's crippled and paralyzed by that fear as the story begins. He's really lost his faith in art and stories. The thing is, a lot of comics are pretty kind of trivial, right? I mean, of course, there's the great graphic novels like Mouse and Fun Home, which we all know are great works of literature and art these days. But the reality is most comics over the years have been pretty slight fantasies. And one of the things Sam starts to question is the purpose of fantasy. So he's pretty miserable as time goes on, and he becomes more and more silent and the blank space stretches. But in the course of the story, I'm not going to tell you too much about the story because, you know, spoilers. But along the way, he gets hurled into a kind of adventure, and he's forced, against his wishes, to explore a series of imaginary worlds inside comic books. And each one of those worlds is someone's fantasy, someone's wish fulfillment fantasy, or, there are monsters, I should say. There's a lot of things in this story that includes monsters, Martians, and the Martians, like cartoonists, they declare Sam the cartoonist god king of Mars. There's a kind of fantasy in that. He meets Venusians. There's a whole nother kind of fantasy there. and erotic fantasy is a big theme in the book. There are pirates, because pirates. There are medieval monks and nuns who get up to all sorts of things they really shouldn't. And there's kind of a bit of everything, really. Because what I really wanted to do was explore the landscapes of fantasy and the relationship we have with them. There are magic comics and a magic pen, hence the title. And you can bring stories to life with the breath of life, bringing whole worlds to life with Tihei Moriora. But at the heart of the story is a different kind of fear, and this is the other fear I want to talk about. And that's the fear of doing the wrong thing morally in our art. There's a question that's asked in the middle of the book, which is, do we bear a moral responsibility for our fantasies? And by extension, for our art and our stories. Now, I've been kind of obsessing over this for quite a long time. And at various times, it's paralysed me as a cartoonist when I have really not been sure whether the story I was about to tell was the right story to tell, ethically. And I'm not the only cartoonist to be silenced by that kind of fear. Just recently, two cartoonists who worked together as Strange Star, one of whom's a New Zealander, Katie O'Neill, a very good cartoonist from Christchurch. They started a comic called Mahu Shonen Breakfast Club, which was going to be serialised on Tumblr, and it's set in Tokyo. The main characters are voice actors who do the voice acting for anime. But only a few pages into the serialization, after working on it for a year, they were challenged online by someone who accused them of cultural appropriation for being white cartoonists drawing a comic about Japanese people set in Japan. And after a few weeks of this kind of circulating and belatedly flaring up into a brief bit of a Tumblr storm and Twitter storm, and some to and fro, they decided that actually they were going to take the criticism on board, and so they pulled their comic and abandoned it. So no more Mahu Shonen Breakfast Club. The 13 pages that have been posted already are all we're going to get. Now that was them making a call that doing the comic was ethically the wrong thing to do. And so they chose to silence it instead. That kind of silence can come from our own sort of thinking through the ethics of what we're doing. It can also come from the fear of other people's responses. The first fear is related to that too. I mean, when we sit down to do a drawing or to write something, one of the things we're scared of is people saying, well, that was a bit shit. You know, it might be critics, it might be our peers, our friends. Sometimes my kids are my harshest critics, it must be said. And sometimes it's our boss or our client, if this is a freelance job. And I don't know about you guys, but I find that fear very, very crippling. It hits me all the time. Because we all know that we're not actually good enough, don't we? I mean, deep down, we know that we're faking it, right? It's like, I can't actually draw. That's my dark secret. It's not that secret when you look at my books. I really struggle to draw. I mean, it's never come easy. Sometimes I look at some people's work, and clearly they just sit down and it just flows out of their pencil. You know, I don't know how they do it, and they get the anatomy right and everything, and the perspective. And, oh God damn! And I don't know how that works because I've never been like that. I have to struggle for every single finger to be in the right place. Every bit of shading is an agonizing choice to shade or not to shade. Every line, I feel like I'm struggling to keep it following the right path and not veering off sort of towards the corner of the panel. It's a hell of a struggle. And because I know that, every time I sit down and start, my brain is thinking, don't screw up, you're going to screw up. It's very, very, very hard to overcome that fear. But the other fear that I'm talking about is what I've really been wrestling with for the last few months, and particularly since what happened in France in January. A few weeks after the Charlie Hebdo shootings, I went to France to the big comics festival in Angoulême, which is kind of the cartooning capital of Europe every year. And for those of you who don't know, the cartoonists killed in the attack on the Charlie Hebdo office, they weren't just political cartoonists. When I say just political. They didn't only do political cartooning, they did comic books, some of them did animation. They were very, very involved in the comics scene in France as well. So it was a very strange experience to walk into that. There were armed guards on the doors. Everyone had to go through metal detectors. When I visited my publisher in Paris, there were paramilitary police outside with machine guns, because the same publisher also publishes Michel Houellebecq's new novel, which is rather controversial as well. So it was a very, very strange experience. But the Charlie Hebdo cartoonists aren't the only cartoonists who've been silenced by people who don't like what they're drawing, who feel that their drawings are the wrong drawings and their words are the wrong words, that they're saying the wrong thing. Not only have the Charlie Hebdo cartoonists been killed and previously were threatened, their offices bombed, some of them have been under armed guard for quite a while. But many other cartoonists around the world have also been threatened, killed, attacked, beaten, or jailed. And these are just a handful. This is what I'm showing you is really just the tip of the iceberg. And from all over the world, from many different countries, and jailed or beaten or threatened for a wide range of reasons. These two Turkish cartoonists were just convicted in the last couple of days of insulting the president with one of their cartoons. Musa Kart was acquitted recently of the same crime, but it's been appealed by the president, of course. Cartoonists from India, Denmark, and America. Mike Diana was jailed some years ago for drawing cartoons that were considered obscene and dangerous. Molly Norris from Seattle has been in hiding under an assumed identity for quite a few years after drawing a cartoon joking about having a Let's All Draw Muhammad Day, which a few people took a little too seriously. So these are some of the cartoons they've been killed for, or jailed for, or attacked for. It's Molly Norris's one. This is the cartoon that just got the two Turkish cartoonists convicted. And the prosecutor claimed that this gesture on this character was a suggestion that the President Erdogan is obviously a homosexual. That was a gesture implying that he was a homosexual. And I love what one of the cartoonists said in court, which was, he said, the problem with your whole prosecution is that in order for this to be insulting, that means that to say someone is homosexual is an insult, which I don't believe. But the same cartoonist also made a joke at one point when the prosecutor just wouldn't let up on that. He said, I'm starting to wonder where your conviction that means that Erdogan is homosexual comes from. Is this possibly something in your own subconscious desires coming through? For which he's now being prosecuted for insulting the prosecutor. So I kind of want to ask the question, what do we do? What do we do about those two fears? Do we choose to stay silent? Or do we take the risk, take the gamble that we're going to screw up or that we're going to piss someone off? And to me, every time I start working on a drawing or start writing a story, it's a little like I'm setting out into completely unknown territory. I don't feel like I'm going on a well-mapped journey because the territory is unknown. Instead, I feel like an explorer, and I'm going to have to map it myself as I go. So the only guide I've got, really, is my compass. And my compass is, I've got like an aesthetic compass. I've got my own sense of what is going to work for me as I'm drawing this thing or telling the story. And I've also got a moral compass. Now, they're very unreliable, these compasses. They kind of, they pick up, every time I walk past some strange piece of rock on this journey, it might turn out to be magnetic and it screws up with the compass and it starts spinning like crazy. Sometimes what I think is true north actually turns out to be south-southwest, and I'm going in the wrong direction. But they're the only compasses I've got. And I think that one of the problems we have when we sit down to start a piece of work is that some people think they have the one true compass. Some people think they have the one true artistic compass. There are a few critics like that out there, and sometimes art directors and bosses. I apologize to the art directors here. I know some lovely art directors who don't think that way. But the reality is there is no one true artistic compass. We're making this up as we go along. We all are. And the landscape that we're exploring when we make art, even when we make commercials and advertisements, the landscape we're really exploring is the landscape of the human imagination. And I defy anyone to think that they've mapped that, right? Or even that they've worked out where true north is in the human imagination. Because if there is one, it's shifting and changing all the time. So we don't have one true compass. So all you've got to go by is your own unreliable one that's constantly shifting and changing. You're pathfinding. You're blazing a trail. And I feel the same is true with our moral compass as well. No one knows the truth about what's right and wrong in the world. And no one knows what's right and wrong about what we should draw, about what ideas and fantasies and daydreams we should be exploring. Because you never know which one's going to uncover some insight or understanding, or even just some wonderful pleasure that we didn't know existed before. Actually, I just wanted to quote Terry Pratchett, who died recently. He had a wonderful line, which I'm going to paraphrase because I'm quoting it from memory, but he essentially said, the company of those who are seeking the truth is infinitely preferable to the company of those who believe they've found it. So the magic pen ends. It ends with Sam again facing another blank piece of paper, another empty page. But it's a different empty page. Actually, another Terry Pratchett line, which is great for storytellers. He said, I'll see if I can remember this one correctly. He said, coming back to the same place is very different to never leaving in the first place. So Sam's back to the same place. It's a blank piece of paper, but the paper is different in the end. It's no longer a silence that can't be broken. It's now listening. It's waiting. It's open. It's full of possibilities, infinite possibilities. And it's ready for Sam to draw anything at all. And he can go anywhere he wants on that piece of paper. So my challenge to everyone here is, here is your empty piece of paper. Here is your silence waiting for you to break it. Mess it up. Go on.